Lose the shot, fair enough.
Rules Committee come to order, and good afternoon, and welcome back to the awesome Rules Committee. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 2792. Yes, it is awesome. You know, even Danny Davis calls us awesome occasionally. Danny, I'm glad you're here with us today, brother. Good to see you. The Control Unlawful Fugitive Felons Act of 2017 and H.R. 2824, the Increasing Opportunity for Success for Children and Parents Through Evidence-Based Home Visiting Act. So we've got a busy day ahead of us and a lot of not only interesting subjects, but perhaps more importantly, an attention to a bill that I think is good for the American people, two bills that are good for the American people. H.R. 2792 amends the Social Security Act to prohibit an individual who is the subject of an outstanding arrest warrant for a felony or parole violation from receiving monthly SSI, Supplemental Security Income Payments, out of Social Security. Individuals who have possibly committed a felony or violated parole should not be able to use taxpayer dollars to evade capture while they're evading capture and should be held accountable for their actions. I want to thank not only the gentlewoman, Christine Ohm, for bringing this to us, but for showing up today to support this bill. The committee will also consider H.R. 2824, which improves the lives of disadvantaged children and families by extending the maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program for 5 years. By voluntarily participating in local home visitation programs, families receive help from health, social services, and child development professionals. Through regular planned home visits, parents learn how to improve their family's health and better provide for opportunities for their children. I'm not sure that I necessarily use that program, but when the good Lord gave my wife and I a Down syndrome child, we very quickly found out that experts need to be in the home almost immediately to help what might be a Down syndrome child. From the very beginning, we learned tips and opportunities and professional guidance for what lay ahead for us. And even though we were both very capable parents, we had not been blessed with a Down syndrome child before. And parents learn a lot from this program, and most sincerely, I appreciate this being done today. Without objection, I'd also like to welcome the gentleman from Nebraska. The gentleman is a kind man and one who cares not only about families, but also cares very much about those people that he represents. Yes, ma'am.
Would you mind? I want to say a little thing about Puerto Rico, if I may.
And I'm going to give you that opportunity in just 1 second. Yes, ma'am.
I won't take long, but I think
go
we've
ahead
got to
and
acknowledge
do it right
this.
now.
I want to recognize the devastation we're witnessing in Puerto Rico right this minute following Hurricane Maria. 100% of the island is currently without power. 95% of the residents have no cell phone reception. Some hospitals are reportedly without running water and medical supplies running low. Food and gasoline are in short supply. A dam there could burst at any minute, which would unleash 11 billions of gallons of water. Many people haven't been able to reach their families since the hurricane made landfall. And the governor this morning raised concerns in an interview that this disaster is very close to a humanitarian crisis. 4,000 members of the Army Reserve are on the ground now to assist with recovery efforts, and FEMA is sending ships with food and water. But they're going to need much more help, and this is only the beginning, I'm afraid. We need to work together in the coming days as a relief package begins to get Puerto Rico, which are our fellow Americans, back on their feet. It will take time and substantial investment, but it is a part of our country, home to more than 3 million people. San Juan's mayor has a very simple request, quote, "Do not forget us and don't let us feel alone," end quote. Let's make sure the catastrophe gets the attention it deserves, and residents there need our help, and we, I know, are the kinds of people who will give it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Appreciate
ma'am,
that.
thank you very much. I'll move to that part of what I was going to say. I've talked to the gentlewoman Jennifer Gonzalez, who is, of course, a member of this body, and we know Stacy Plaskett was involved greatly in this. Jennifer told me she would be here today, was planning on taking a flight, the flights which are maybe not open to all people, but for official business, she was due here, and I suppose Stacy will do the same. In fact, it did wipe out literally off 2 storms, not one. It has wiped out not only their infrastructure, but really the opportunity for them to take care of each other with tremendous amounts of water.
And they have been very generous, if you remember, to Virgin Islands when they were skipped by the first tranche.
I do remember, and thus you remember 2 weeks ago we passed a package that I am calling the Secretary of HUD. I put in a call today to meet with Secretary Carson about releasing the money that we voted on 2 weeks ago. And I remain unclear about the position of HUD in the $7.5 billion. I have heard things that maybe they don't want to release them till the end of the year, till they look at all.
End of the year, wow.
Did you hear that? Till
It's
the
a long
end
time
of
to
the
stand
year.
outside, isn't it?
Well, what they want to do evidently is wait until some period of time till they've added up all of the damages, because there are some 30 things.
Remind
So-
him a hospital has to work.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to remind him. I'm going to remind him that they could release some of the money, if not all of it.
Exactly.
And that I feel like that Congress effectively spoke on behalf of the American people. So just so you know, I owe this committee an answer. In fairness, the secretary, I just put the call in today. So we'll hear back, but I want to make sure that the things we're doing here, Judge Hastings is well aware of how important this is.
With
It's
Florida,
not
yeah.
just Florida, it's not just the islands.
Is Houston doing better?
It's better. Better does not mean that it's
They're out of the
best.
woods, no.
Yes, ma'am. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
But I really do want to say that we're expecting both of these members to be in, as I understand it, this afternoon. And so they are not here, and thus they're having to defend themselves on. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And there will be an amendment that will be in one of these bills on, that deals with the islands, too, that I'm very sensitive about. And I want you to know I'm sensitive about that, too. And I talked to Jennifer about that, because she called me. So let me see if I can go back where I am. So without objection, anything that is brought in writing by our 3 witnesses today will be, on the first panel, will be without objection into the record. We're delighted to have my dear friend Danny Davis, who Danny and I have been friends for a long time, came in together and served on the old postal subcommittee. How about that? Yes, ma'am. We're all delighted that you're here before the Rules Committee. We're looking forward to your testimony. And let me see, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you. I just welcome the witnesses, and I just felt that was something I knew we would all want to call our attention to.
Right up front. Judge, before we get started, do you have any update for us from your weekend or your weekend back home?
Not really, Mr. Chairman, save the fact that Speaker Ryan, Chairman Freelandhausen, and Chair Jack Carter all came down to Florida, and along with our senator and a bipartisan delegation, we toured the damage there. The Middle Keys are pretty much ruined at this point, but most of us are powered back up, and I don't mean that as a pun. I do believe that the first responders and the utility companies have done a more than admirable job. And at 5:30, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to excuse myself to be on a call related to the subject that you and the ranking member just discussed. And we're continuing. It's a long haul for all of us in this country. Thank you, Mr.
Judge, thank you for the update. Ms. Slaughter, thank you very much. Our important witnesses today will bring to us from the Ways and Means Committee the important knowledge that we need to handle today, H.R. 2824, and H.R. 2792. I'm going to guess that first what we're going to do is go to H.R. 2824. So I will go straight to the gentleman from Nebraska. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Chairman
Yes, sir.
Sessions. Thank you, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of the Rules Committee. Thank you for having me here today to talk about H.R. 2824, the Increasing Opportunity and Success for Children and Parents Through Evidence-Based Home Visiting Act. The Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program, or MCV, helps support state and local efforts to provide voluntary, evidence-based, outcome-focused home visiting services to parents and children living in communities where they are at risk of poor social and health outcomes. The program's objectives include improved maternal and newborn health, prevention of child injuries, child abuse, neglect, or maltreatment, and reduction of emergency department visits, improvement in school readiness and achievement, reduction in crime or domestic violence, improvements in family economic self-sufficiency, and improvements in the coordination and referrals for other community resources and supports. MCV is one of the only federal social programs where funding is tied to proven evidence. Unfortunately, MCV is the exception to how we often fund programs, as few federal social programs have been evaluated to determine if they are working, and almost none tie the receipt of funding to evidence of effectiveness. There is broad bipartisan support for MCV, including dozens of national organizations and hundreds of state and local organizations, ranging from business leaders, law enforcement officers, faith-based groups, healthcare providers, child welfare advocacy organizations, and early education providers. While I understand some of my colleagues would like to continue this program or even increase funding without paying for it, our current deficits mean it would be irresponsible to continue to fund programs without finding ways to reduce spending elsewhere. That's why this bill is being paired with H.R. 2792, the Control Unlawful Fugitive Felons Act of 2017, to prioritize federal spending and focus on what works, such as by improving the integrity of one program to provide funding for another, as we are doing today. I'm grateful to be here today to discuss this important bill, and I'm glad we are moving forward so we can ensure this program continues in the years ahead. I thank the members of the Rules Committee for their consideration and would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Smith, thank you very much. Mr. Davis, we're delighted that you're here, and Danny, I want to take just a second and thank you for your years of service, not only to this Congress, but also the people of Illinois for your consistent, strong voice, representation. My dear friend, you're now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of the committee. I thank all of you for inviting me to testify about H.R. 2824 and H.R. 2792, which I understand the House plans to combine. I oppose both measures separately and in combination. I introduced my first bipartisan home visiting bill in 2005, and I wish we were here today to talk about a bipartisan bill, and I urge the Rules Committee to make in order the amendments that are needed for the House to pass a bipartisan bill. Research is clear. Home visiting makes kids and families stronger, healthier, and safer. In my home state of Illinois, MCV improved program coordination and expanded availability of services. Unfortunately, the majority's approach has rejected bipartisanship and made timely reauthorization of home visiting less likely. H.R. 2824 makes changes to MCV that reduce home visiting services and effectiveness. Home visiting experts did not recommend these changes. Further, home visiting experts say these changes would force them to shut down successful programs in some of the neediest and highest risk states and communities. Tribal leaders have said that this bill is likely to completely end the effective home visiting programs on Indian reservations. H.R. 2824 also is inconsistent with bipartisan Senate legislation introduced last week, which rejected the most controversial and problematic changes in H.R. 2824 in favor of keeping what works. I joined with over 110 civil rights, disability, and retirement groups in opposing the majority's plan to condition helping vulnerable children and families via McVie on harming vulnerable seniors and people with severe disabilities by cutting Supplemental Security Income Benefits, or SSI. Proponents of H.R. 2792 falsely claim to target fugitive felons. But those affected by this harmful bill are neither fugitives, they're not hiding from the police, nor felons. They have not been convicted of the alleged offense. True fugitive felons are already prohibited from receiving benefits under current law. I repeat, fugitive felons are currently prohibited from receiving SSI under current law. H.R. 2792 undermines the constitutional presumption of innocence at the foundation of our justice system. It deprives individuals of due process and lowers the legal standard for deprivation of government benefits based on a mere accusation rather than conviction. Remember, those who would lose benefits are the people that law enforcement declined to arrest when provided their names and addresses by SSA. Prior experience showed that police arrested only about 20% of these individuals, but declined to pursue about 80%. Yet H.R. 2792 would exact its own justice by cutting benefits for all. Further, the harm caused by H.R. 2792 is not just or even. H.R. 2792 magnifies the deep inequities in our criminal justice system based on race, ethnicity, and income. As an African-American man, the racial and ethnic disparities inherent in our criminal justice system are very familiar to me and to my community. I join with national leaders like the NAACP, the Consortium of Citizens with Disabilities, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Social Works to strongly oppose H.R. 2792. The last time the policy of H.R. 2792 was attempted, it terminated benefits for people with dementia and cognitive impairments. It cut off people for mistaken identities, for outstanding warrants of which they were unaware, for attempting suicide, and for minor offenses like shoplifting or failure to appear in a proceeding. It caused devastating hardship for tens of thousands of people with nowhere to turn. I join with my colleague John Lewis, who voiced his hope that we could do better than this mean bill. The House can still pass bipartisan legislation to continue McVie, and we should. Several of my colleagues have filed good amendments. I sincerely hope they will be made in order. They would remove H.R. 2824's most harmful provisions and prevent the shutdown of successful home visiting programs in the communities that need them. The Rules Committee also should reject any request to condition home visiting reauthorization on harming seniors and disabled Americans, as H.R. 27 would do, and especially refuse to tie the two bills together in a self-executing rule without a vote of the House. As you saw in our dissenting views, Ways and Means Democratic members oppose this necessary linkage. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back my time.
Mr. Davis, thank you very much. I appreciate your not only viewpoint, but addressing that. We'll next move to the gentlewoman, Ms. Christie No. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, could you clarify, would you like me to speak on 2792?
In fact, I would, as I said at the beginning, I was guessing that we would begin with 2824. In fact, I saw the mix between
Right.
them. I think the gentlewoman should address either as she chooses. I chose to start with Mr. Smith, so we kicked off this issue that was, I think, the lead piece of legislation. So the gentlewoman be recognized for either H.R. 2824 and/or 2792.
Well, thank you, Chairman Session and Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of the Rules Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on my bill, H.R. 2792, the Control Unlawful Fugitive Felons Act, which passed the Ways and Means Committee last week on a bipartisan basis. In 1996, Congress and President Clinton worked together to reform welfare. That reform included provisions providing a range of welfare benefits, including supplemental security income, from being paid to fugitive felons and violators of probation and parole, because safety net programs needed to be protected from abuse so that they can remain in place for those who need them. Due to a number of factors involving the courts, these provisions have been watered down in recent years and rendered ineffectual. Through the CUFT Act, Congress can stand up once again on behalf of our communities and affirm what every participant in our society should understand. If you have an outstanding warrant for your arrest, you have an obligation to face justice or clear your name. The provisions in this legislation not only stop benefits from going to those who are not following the law, they have a proven track record of helping law enforcement apprehend suspects. In fact, law enforcement thinks this policy is so effective that the Fraternal Order of Police and the National Sheriff's Association have expressed support for the CUF Act. Simply put, my legislation does not speak to policing practices, criminal justice practices, or the content of a warrant, just the fact that the warrant exists. The decision to grant a warrant is made by a judge in a court of law, not by the Social Security Administration, and it should not be the duty of the American taxpayer to subsidize individuals who are wanted by the police. This bill stops payments to individuals who have outstanding warrants for felonies. These are crimes like murder, rape, and kidnapping. It also stops payments to individuals with probation and parole violations, limiting their ability to evade arrest. Supplemental security income is a lifeline to those most in need. We must ensure we're not further facilitating criminal activity in communities that are all too often already struggling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to speak to the reauthorization of home visiting, it is also a critically important bill that we're talking about today as well, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to it. We do have a lot of successes, and the match that we're proposing in this legislation is very important. During the debate of that legislation in the Ways and Means Markup Committee, I discussed with the chairman and the staff of the Ways and Means that I have 9 federally recognized tribes in the state of South Dakota that are Lakota Sioux that have very high rates of poverty, crime, trafficking, drug issues, and that a match would be difficult for them. And the chairman and the staff worked with me, as did other members of the committee, to give a delay in the match for a full 5 years to give us time to work to find a way that these poverty-stricken tribes could come to a situation where they would have the ability to match and do exactly what the legislation is requiring of other communities across the country. So I appreciated them working with me to get that delay and to understand the challenges that we face in some of the most rural areas of South Dakota, and that was included in the bill and is in the bill today as it stands. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'm going to defer my time to the gentlewoman who has a territory much like yours, Christy. The gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Noem, I wanted to start with you. In terms of H.R. 2792, what your bill does really is return us to the original intent, isn't that right? And the change in this language from actively fleeing to now the existence of a warrant seems to me to be the key here. But am I accurate in terms of the original intent piece of this, and could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. This bill is bringing us back to the welfare reform that was passed in a bipartisan manner under President Bill Clinton. And so what this does is taking us back to that current statute that stood back then. Through certain court cases that have passed in recent years, it's become diluted and interpreted very differently. What this is doing is clarifying in statute exactly that those who are fleeing from police for violation of probation or parole, or those with felony warrants, will not receive SSI benefits until that is rectified. Now, one of the provisions that I didn't bring up in my opening statement was that the Office of Inspector General is the one who first determines if this individual does have a warrant or has violated probation or parole. Then they go through making sure the identity of that person is the correct person that they're referring to. They notify SSA. SSA gives them 35 days to rectify the situation, to make sure that if that is not a correct warrant, or to resolve the warrant before any activity is taken. And so the due process is there, and there is an opportunity for an appeal as well before any benefits can be taken away, and then there is an opportunity to be restored if that is certainly rectified in the future. So we feel as though returning to this policy is the right thing to do for taxpayers, but also for those out there who have warrants for their arrest, to give them an opportunity to get it rectified.
Thank you very much. And then, Mr. Smith, on HR 2824, I was particularly pleased to see that, that this tied to effectiveness. And could you talk a little bit more about that? We've got this federal program that's targeting families in at-risk communities, and it very much is focused, though, on making sure that our tax dollars are being spent in a way that helps these families, and effectiveness is a key element of that.
Right. We want this to be effective, obviously. I mentioned in my opening remarks the 6 benchmark areas, and actually there's enough flexibility in the program that a local entity would need to show measurable improvements in 4 of those 6, or all 6 if they would happen to do that. But the minimum requirement would be 4 of those 6. And obviously they are points that I think we can agree we want to work to get beyond in our country, and ultimately save taxpayer dollars too. And that's why there is very eager state, local, and even private foundation participation already taking place. And I think that this bill can help take that to the next level.
Great, thank you very much. I support both of these bills. I think that they move us in exactly the right direction, and commend you all for being here today. And with that, I yield back, Mr.
Thank you
Chairman.
very much. Ms. Slaughter?
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Davis certainly explained the Democrat position here. I want to make it very clear that this is a program that we have really been in support of forever, and it has always been bipartisan. In fact, in the Senate, it is bipartisan. On September 19th, Senators Chuck Grassley, Robert Menendez, Roy Blunt, Bob Casey, Cory Gardner, Ben Cardin, and Sherrod Brown introduced a bipartisan bill to reauthorization without the most controversial provisions included in the House bill, and also included the highly controversial new state match requirement. So we are doing an entirely different bill here, and I'm sorry about that. And let me quote the ranking member from Ways and Means, that H.R. 2824 would not provide a single penny for new funding. At the current funding levels, it serves only 6% of the eligible families and less than 1/3 of the counties. There was an amendment to double the funding, as Mr. Davis said, which was rejected. The Republicans plan to offset the budget impact by cutting benefits for the vulnerable seniors and Americans with severe disabilities, to combine H.R. 2824 with H.R. 2792. They want to create a new punishment for loss of basic income, actually, for individuals who've only been accused of a crime, not tried or convicted, and for whom law enforcement sought not to seek an arrest after being notified of their names and addresses. So that seems really punishing to me, that if law enforcement, the place who apparently knew who they were and notified with who they were, the defense was chose not to arrest them, but we are still going to punish them before they ever are adjudicated as guilty. We're very much concerned, too, that the requirement would be subject to other state emergencies, such as disasters, other things that might come along that they thought were more important or more of the moment than visiting these children. We're concerned whether tribal, Ms. Norm, you mentioned that the tribes were given 5 years. Does that mean that they will not pay a match for 5 years, or they give up the services for 5 years?
No, are you talking about the tribes? No, they don't give up the services. They just have a 5-year period of time to where they can come up with a method for meeting the match that's required under the legislation.
Well, who will pay for their services during that time?
They continually will receive the federal funding that they receive today through the authorization.
They will get the same funding?
Yes, they will. And there is no funding cut in the
No, I
legislation.
understand.
Just
There's
a-
not a
just a
penny of
match
new
re-
funding
Yep.
in here. I understand that. All right, we are very concerned with what's happening with this program because of the need for it. Nurse family participation that we have in New York and programs like these make all the difference in the world in a child's life. And as my leader, Nancy Pelosi, says, to give a child a good start means that child's probably going to have a good outcome. And we need to, if we're only reaching 6% of them, that's not very noble of us, is it? But in any case, appreciate your being here, but as I understand it from the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Davis can correct me if I'm mistaken, that there was a unanimous vote no. Is that correct?
That is
All
correct.
right. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cole.
Thank you. I see the gentlelady was getting ready to make
Well,
a remark, so let me yield time
Is
to her
that-
quickly.
Thank you, I appreciate that, Representative Cole. I just wanted to clarify that, similar to what other states already do in their social programs, like with foster care, Medicaid, child support enforcement, child care, others, there is a match in those programs as well, and so this would be similar to what we see in other programs. And then according to CRS, many states already meet this requirement. They already match the dollars. And there would be, even though there is no match requirement in statute, nationally, at least $340 million would already count towards that match that's happening in other states.
Everything I've read here this afternoon from groups that are involved say that the match is the single most disturbing thing that they think will have a dreadful effect on the 6% of the children
It
that
would
we're
be a
trying to
new-
help with these programs.
Oh, you.
I certainly continue to yield to my friend,
Well, I wanted to answer on the Cuff Act,
and to
because
my other friend as well, obviously.
Because
Yeah.
you talked about the fact that this is only going after individuals that law enforcement chose not to pursue, and the bill doesn't target in. Well, but that it would go, in.
I think it's unconstitutional
But it's,
having anybody adjudicated.
I understand, but this does not target individuals with an arrest warrant for simple misdemeanors, only those with felony charges or a crime carrying a minimum term of 1 or more years in prison. So there's nothing in this bill that states that SSA would exclusively affect arrest warrants which law enforcement has chosen not to pursue. There's already a provision in law that states that the commissioner has an exception clause if the offense is nonviolent or drug-related, and as a result of court cases in the last decade, SSA is now required to provide additional notice to individuals and the opportunity for them to establish good cause, for them to prevent the suspension of payments, which protects SSI recipients. So I believe there is due process in there, and SSI benefits, if they are suspended incorrectly, SSA has processes in place to restore those payments.
If I may reclaim my, unless my friend.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Let me just, I just want to quickly thank the gentlelady from North Dakota for advocacy on behalf.
South, but
South,
okay.
I said
Yep,
north, I'm
that's all
sorry.
right.
I know, I've been to your reservations.
You
so,
have.
And you were there, and but the point I wanted to make was thank you for your advocacy for these tribes in this case. For those of my colleagues that have not had the opportunity to go to some of the reservations in my friend's state of South Dakota, they are very challenging environments. You're talking about unemployment rates of 75 and 85%. These are very remote locations. They don't have the same opportunities for economic development that a lot of other tribes do. And so this is a case where the need is really great. And I know my friend has other plans, but I'd certainly continue to work with you or anybody else there to make sure that we don't lose these services in places that are the most needy probably in the country. States usually could find the ability to match. It's very difficult. Some tribes can. In the case of my tribe, we could. And that's not the problem. But as we work through this knotty problem, you just have to recognize there are some of these reservations that are simply too poor to do it. And there ought to be some set aside or some special treatment for them. So thank you for your advocacy so they didn't lose an important benefit that I think we can search for a long time, and I think some of these are going to be very, very hard to find the match on. This at least buys us the time so that we can talk to our colleagues and figure out a way that we don't end up making sure that tribes that are relatively affluent can do the match and tribes that are really desperately poor. And in these cases, Pine Ridge and Cheyenne River and Standing Rock and Rosebud really are places that have huge challenges. So I would just urge my friends on the committee as they go forward and hopefully resolve this problem for this time, that we think about a way, again, to make sure that we don't lose really important services to places that simply just don't have the money to match ever.
Right.
And I'd love that to change in the next 5 years, but I'm not as optimistic as I would like to be that it will. So with that, I just want to thank the gentlelady again. I know my friend has a couple of these reservations as well in Nebraska.
Right, right. And I would say that there's been an emphasis of trying to be flexible in terms of the match, whether it's using SSBG dollars, whether it's private foundations, and the fact that already there's emphasizing what my colleague mentioned, $340 million toward the $400 million, and coming from different levels, different places. But it shows an eagerness to participate both in the public and private sector that I think makes everything, on course with the ability to do so, makes things.
Yeah,
more
that's why,
effective.
look, I applaud you guys for what you're trying to accomplish here. I think we need to do more of this sort of thing, frankly. We're the runs. I always remind some of my friends in my own state to brag about their balanced budget. That's great, but it's really not balanced if you look at 30–40% of it's coming from the federal government. I think this idea of encouraging people and entities that can, states in particular that can, to do it, and frankly, even tribes that can. But I just want to applaud your effort to make sure that in our rush to do the right thing, we don't inadvertently damage some people that, with all the will in the world. Again, I would just ask my colleagues to go there, and we've all got areas in our respective parts of the country that have economic challenges, so that always has to be built in. States are usually big enough that they can do things, but tribes are really confined to comparatively small areas, and it really is, prosperity is almost dictated by location more than anything else. And if you can be located with a gaming facility near a big metropolitan area, that's great, but, if you have vast mineral resources, that can be good. I've seen that as transformative for some tribes, but you really do have to look at it entity by entity, and these areas that you guys are both concerned and frankly both represent areas like that. It's just, we're very fortunate to have both of you in the position that you're in to make this kind of argument and to protect people that in this case genuinely need a protection. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I would just say that in my brief and doing my homework on this, I was led to believe and understood this would allow an observation period for the time to see if we need to change the law, allowing them that chance to defer till the fifth year, as I understand it. So I think what Chairman Cole has accurately said is, and we're going to learn a little bit more rather than moving it up front. So I was pleased with that, too. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you for being here. I think it's clear that I think both sides have kind of presented the pros and cons of this, and while I wish this could have been truly a bipartisan effort, it is what it is. I just hope that that the amendments that have been offered could be made in order so that there could be a free-flowing debate on the floor. So I'm not going to prolong this any longer, but thank you for being here, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman, Mr. Davis, sir, did you want to, Jim, did you want to keep your time and allow?
I'm happy if I could yield to Mr. Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And when we look at this across the board, McVie has a maintenance of effort, so therefore the match is not as much of a problem in terms of the tribes. But when you look at even requiring states to come with a match, given the devastation that many states have just recently experienced, they're going to have a hard time not only matching, but they're just going to have a hard time rebuilding their own communities and their own states. And to me, more problematic than anything proposed in the legislation is this business of pursuing individuals with outstanding warrants, which cuts at the core, and especially if there is a cutoff before something lands in court, it cuts at the basic principle of our judicial system. You're innocent until proven guilty. And so there might be a warrant because something has not been adjudicated, but there's nothing to say that you're guilty because of that. And so that's why all of these groups and organizations especially are opposing this part of the bill. That's why the Democrats on the committee are in opposition to it. We want individuals to be able to maintain their rights. And some of these individuals, the warrants are so old that people have forgotten them. Sometimes the individuals have reached a stage where they've got dementia, they don't remember. And so any likelihood of disrupting the Social Security benefits that they're getting, we just think is unconscionable, that it just will not work, and I will yield back.
Yes, sir. And I would assume, did the gentleman still continue, or
Happy
did
to-
the gentleman just about time? And I think we've got other members of the committee which are going to delve into parts of this, and thank you, gentleman, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to get ample chance to talk about this on the floor tomorrow, so I will yield back.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mike. Gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings.
I will be handling it on the floor, and I'll yield back as well. I thank all of the witnesses, but I'll have an opportunity on the floor. to
Judge,
express-
thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia does not seek time. Gentleman from Alabama. The gentleman from Colorado does not seek time. Well, I will. I've still got some time left for me, so Mr. Davis has brought this issue up, and I think, yes, ma'am.
Well, to speak to that, I want to just remind the committee that this bill only touches those who have felony warrants for their arrest. So that is for a serious crime involving something like a rape, a murder, kidnapping, or those who are fleeing probation or violating parole. So those that have gone through the court process, have been put on probation or on parole, and then they are fleeing from that responsibility that they have. He talked about those who would lose benefits that have intellectual disabilities or something that they're struggling with, but this bill also provides opportunity for individuals to establish good cause to prevent the suspension of benefits, which protects these SSI recipients. So if SSI benefits are suspended incorrectly, SSA will make them whole in process to restore those benefits quickly.
So, thank you. Question occurs, perhaps there was a, as the gentleman suggested, 20 years ago, there was some warrant that was issued. Whether they fled or didn't flee, they're found now. The Inspector General would be expected to give them some notice, 35 days
Yes.
out. Inspector General would be expected to take things into account, and if a person might be 75 years old, I'm just making up a scenario, and might be in disrepair, I would imagine that they would bring them forthright to a court. Court would adjudicate what they were doing, would recognize that whatever the court would make a decision, and that would resolve the issue in as much as them not being a fugitive from the law.
This would give that individual an opportunity to clear up that warrant that
Right.
had been out there for 20 years. They may not have been aware of it, but SSA would bring it to their attention and give them 35 days to take care of that. If it was a warrant that was not valid and not credible, it could be eliminated. If it was, it gives them time to make sure that they deal with that properly and get back in good standing so that taxpayers aren't subsidizing someone who currently has a warrant out for their arrest.
Yes, ma'am. Would you anticipate, and I would, that there will be people who will come into contact with this, and you will find out that they have either fallen on bad health or things that the court may wish to resolve the matter. Would you
Absolutely.
expect that the court would resolve the matter, understanding and knowing this, and would work with the person? Is there anything in the law that would not give discretion to them to allow some time for the court if they did petition the court, if they offered to petition the court, or would they just cut them off?
That, and also within SSA, the commissioner has the latitude for specific circumstances to offer relief and continue benefits to those that have a situation such as the one you described.
I would think that was the way I read the law too, but I really would like to say, Mrs. Nome, that I think that the integrity of the program is what you have brought forth to us. And given the flexibility for this to be played out in real life over time between local people, courts, law enforcement, and to be resolved. And I quite honestly am pleased the more that I heard about this, not only your hard work on it, but the integrity of the program and the system.
And Mr. Chairman, one last
Yes, ma'am.
thought that I would close with is that I would like all the members of the committee to remember that this statute does not go into effect for 4 years. So we have 4 years to put this statute into effect before these changes take place.
Yes, ma'am. And I did think that I understood that, allowing people back home time to know that. Is there any other member of the committee that would wish to engage this panel? Seeing none, I want to thank all three of you. Mr. Davis, good to see you. Ms. Nome, Mr. Smith, thank you very much. If you'll please remember that if you brought anything in writing for our awesome stenographer, that would enable her to complete her homework properly, and I want to thank each of you for being here. We now move to amendment testimony, and I noticed that the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquarello, is here. And is there any other member that would seek time? Any other member that would seek time? Coach, we're delighted that you're here. Without objection, anything you brought in writing will be entered in the record, and the gentleman's recognized. Mr. Davis, do you intend to stay as a witness? That's fine. Thank you very much. Mr. Pascal?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on 2 amendments I've submitted to H.R. 2824, the Increasing Opportunity and Success for Children and Parents through Evidence-Based Home Visiting Act. I'm happy to say, Mr. Chairman, that there is, in the bipartisan Senate bill, it is these 2 issues that I'm about to talk about today are solved. I'm hopeful that we can make some progress today, and I appreciate the fact that you're listening.
Yes, sir. By the way, did the Senate pass this yet?
No.
Thank you.
The First Amendment would strike the provision in the bill that would add a state match requirement for the maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program, pronounced MICV, M-I-E-C-H-V. But make no mistake, Mr. Chairman, the state match requirement is a cut to home visiting programs in the communities that need it the most. Congress specifically targeted MICV funding to the most at-risk families and communities. The language is very clear in the legislation. State matching requirements directly interfere with that goal. Since states and communities with the most need may have the fewest resources to make required contributions, many of the poor states will be simply unable to meet the requirement and will lose their federal dollars and have to cut off home visiting service for families. I also expect some state legislatures to refuse to provide a match simply because they don't like the federal government telling them how to spend their money. Several state MICV programs are already administered by nonprofit organizations because the state chose not to accept the federal money or chose not to run the program. It seems unlikely that those states will put up a match so they can keep serving families in need. Similarly, many Indian tribes refuse to participate in matching programs because they consider them a violation of tribal sovereignty. States are already subject to a maintenance of effort requirement. This bill would raise the bar in states as a condition of receiving the same money, not new money. And states are understandably concerned about what will come next. For states that do try to meet the match requirement, Mr. Chairman and members of this distinguished panel, there's considerable risk and uncertainty. The current situation with Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria are good examples. These states dealing with those major disasters may need to focus state resources on recovery in the next few years, perhaps including diverting funds which had previously been invested in home visiting. The match requirement doubles the penalty to a state anytime a source of funding for home visiting is withdrawn. If a private funder, the state legislature, or a local community stops providing support for home visiting, then the state will lose that funding and all of the federal MCV funds that is matching. So the uncertainty will be particularly extreme in states where social services, where their programs are generally administered on a county level, as in New Jersey, for instance, and I'm sure many of the states. In those states, each county will be at the mercy of other county funding decisions. If one county shifts enough resources out of home visiting, it might result in a loss of funding for the entire state. States that currently rely on funding from private foundations will also be at risk. Those foundations usually provide startup funds to get programs going and then move on to the next worthy cause. If they continue that pattern, states that have just gotten home visiting going to needy communities are likely to lose all their home visiting funding instead of just the foundation funding. So I have questions about the timing. Home visiting is a long-term intervention, usually lasting a year or more. Look at the numbers. If a state loses part of its match funding and is penalized by also losing its federal funding partway through the year, we'll have to cut families off immediately. That's a question. Will it have to cut off even more families in order to repay past grants to the federal government? So the bill claims to allow states to use other federal funding as a match for these dollars. I question whether that is legally possible, since many of the other funding streams have rules prohibiting. They're mostly categorical money we're talking about. They got to go to, they're targeted to specific things. And Congress has a long history of punishing states for using federal dollars to match other federal dollars, even as legally permitted. My second amendment would strike the provision in the bill that would add increasing employment and earnings to the MCV program's measured outcomes. I obviously share the goal of increasing employment and earnings across the country. However, home visiting is not an employment program. It is a program to strengthen families, to make kids healthier, safer, and more ready to learn when they start school. Those are the outcomes home visiting models strive for, and those are the outcomes, the proof is there, they achieve. In my district in New Jersey, I know the good that these programs do. In Passaic County, our home visiting program worked with a pregnant mom expecting a child with a heart defect. The baby required open heart surgery shortly after the child was born, last July. After the surgery, the newborn continued to have health complications, and at times his mom felt depressed and hopeless, feared that her child was not going to survive. The home visiting program's family support worker was able to assist the mom by connecting her to services, providing her the emotional support that she needed, and acting as a liaison with the hospital. We know the negative impact that postpartum depression can have on new moms and their babies, and the home visiting program was able to connect this mom to supportive services and alleviate her depression so that she could be a healthy and present mother. I'm happy to report that after nearly 3 months in the hospital, this little boy was finally able to go home. His mom continues to work with the home visiting program in northern New Jersey. I don't think anyone can hear that story and not see value in the services that are provided. This home visiting program helped a mom navigate her newborn son's health care crisis and manage the mental health issues that she had herself. But under the provision that my amendment is seeking to strike from this bill, this outcome will not be measured as a success. There's something wrong with that. Most home visiting models focus on families with newborns or very small children, focus on building a parent-child relationship. Many home visiting programs focus on teen parents and young mothers, and the priority is to keep them in school, and make sure they continue their education. There are currently 18 evidence-based home visiting models. None of them provide employment services. None of them measure employment and earnings. Home visitors have raised concerns that having to ask families about employment and earnings would be intrusive and would undermine the relationship they're trying to build with the families in the first place. Even if the data is collected without specifically asking the families for it, knowing their performance is being measured based on their clients' labor force participation will likely make home visitors feel that they have to press their clients to work, even if, like the case of the mom in Passaic County, that shouldn't be the main objective. Additionally, this bill provides no new funding, none. So any resources devoted to supporting work would have to be diverted from MCV's core purposes. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to testify today. I urge the committee to make these amendments in order, and I appreciate the committee listening. Thank you.
Mr. Pascarello, I want to thank you very much. Mr. Davis, do you intend to give additional testimony to the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
I have an amendment to strike H.R. 2824 and replace it with a clean reauthorization with double the funding.
That would be amendment number 6 for the committee.
Right.
Substitute bill. Go ahead. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
home visiting helps 150,000 families a year, yet the wait list for services are long. With current funding, only about 6% of families in the United States that could benefit actually receive services, with access even lower in rural and tribal communities. Indeed, less than half of the qualified applicants for a tribal McV are funded. Despite a direct request to double funding from 826 child advocates, despite a request to expand funding by the Association of State and Tribal Home Visiting Initiatives, and despite multiple hearings praising McV, the Republican bill fails to increase federal funding for home visiting by even 1 penny. Further, H.R. 2824 exacts harmful cuts to home visiting services by requiring a dollar-for-dollar match. No home visiting experts asked for this match, not one, because experts know that this match would dramatically reduce home visiting in many states and almost all tribes. Home visiting experts also know that states already have to support home visiting through a strong maintenance of effort provision. Given the likely harm from the state match, many national experts supported striking the state match in committee, including the Home Visiting Coalition, Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters, or HIPPY, Prevent Child Abuse USA, Parents as Teachers, First Focus Campaign for Children, Nurse Family Partnership, Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, Association of State and Tribal Health Officials, and the Ulcer Prevention Fund. H.R. 2824 also sets McV up for failure by redefining success to mean employment and earnings. Home visiting is a child development program, not a job training program. We should not define success of evidence-based home visiting as increasing jobs and earnings because there is no evidence that home visiting increases employment and earning because that is not what home visiting does. I proudly join with Representatives DeJette, Doggett, and Castor to offer our amendment to strike H.R. 2824 and replace it with a clean 5-year reauthorization that doubles the funding for this proven evidence-based program. Importantly, this amendment was supported in committee by the Home Visiting Coalition and the First Focus Campaign for Children. I am proud that our amendment would double investment in McVie as requested by 826 organizations. I am proud that doubling funding would help improve child development and health for Native American tribes and would allow states to continue innovations and service expansion. Further, I am proud that our amendment would fund the full cost by eliminating so-called stretch IRAs, a bipartisan tax policy that was supported unanimously by our colleagues on the Senate Finance Committee in 2016. I joined with over 110 civil rights, disability, and retirement groups in opposing the majority's plan to condition helping vulnerable children and families on SSI cuts that discriminate based on age, race, ethnicity, ability, and income, and which further criminalizes poverty. H.R. 2824 reduces home visiting services and effectiveness. We should reject these changes and increase funding to allow this bipartisan, evidence-based program to continue its success. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. This gentleman from Massachusetts,
Just want to thank the two gentlemen for their appearance here today, and I support their amendments. I do as well. Yield back.
Thank you, Judge Hastings. Thank you very much. Chairman Cole?
Just want to thank my friends for being here. No question.
Dr. Burgess? Any member of the committee seek time? I want to thank both of you for taking time not only to come and appear, but your strenuous support of the program that I believe that is worthy. And I want to thank you both and hope that you will both leave anything you brought in writing for our awesome stenographer as you exit the committee today, and thank you very much. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, the committee would make itself available for any other member of this body to come and address the Rules Committee concerning H.R. 2824 or 2792. Is any other member of the body that would seek recognition? Rules Committee seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 2824 and closes the hearing portion for 2792. And the clerk will now be in receipt of a motion. Excuse me, the gentleman from Oklahoma would now be in receipt of a motion for the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 2824, the Increasing Opportunity and Success for Children and Parents Through Evidence-Based Home Visiting Act, the structured rule. Rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-33 and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order. Only the further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and unopponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without structured with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 2792, the Control on Lawful Fugitive Felons Act of 2017, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and a ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of substitute recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Finally, Section 3 of the rule directs that the clerk in the engrossment of H.R. 2824, add the text of H.R. 2792 as passed by the House as a new matter at the end of H.R. 2824, and making conforming modifications in the engrossment.
You now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. I'd like to yield myself time. This is one rule, two measures. H.R. 2824 with home visiting is a structured rule, 1 hour debate. Ways and Means Committee makes an order of 4 amendments, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, and 1 bipartisan motion to recommit. H.R. 2792, 1 hour debate to the Ways and Means Committee, a motion to recommit. And what we will do is to comply with cut-go rules. The rule will go directly to the clerk to add the text of H.R. 2792 to the end of 2824. They'll be put together so that as one rule, 2 measures, and upon passage, they will move. Is there further amendment or discussion?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 2824 and H.R. 2792 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Thank you very much. Discussion. Seeing none, the vote will now be on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Noes have it, noes have it. Any amendment or discussion? Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Ask for a roll call.
Gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Aye. Mr. Buck? Aye. Ms. Cheney? Aye. Ms. Cheney? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk report the total.
9 yeas, 2 nays.
The motion is agreed to accordingly. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess, will be handling this for Republicans.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, for the
The
Democrats.
gentleman, Judge Hastings, will be handling this for Democrats. Now, there's always a question that comes up about this time, and that is, are there other meetings that have been scheduled for the Rules Committee for the week? The answer is, we do not have any meetings currently scheduled. Further discussion?
We appreciate that clarification.
Wanted to ask the question for the question, answer the question before the question was asked. Thank you very much. This completes our work for the day.